Imagine unlocking a door that's been sealed for 20 years and finding hundreds of photographs of the woman you loved. Every smile, every breath, tracked and catalogued like prey. And at the end of that tunnel, a single chair. A tape recorder. You press play, and it's her voice. The same woman the whole town buried, whispering, "Evan, if you're hearing this, it means they found me." Then she says the words that make your blood freeze. "They told me it was for our safety. But I saw what they were really doing." Sheriff Leland, he's building a story. They need someone to disappear. Someone clean. Someone people will mourn. Now imagine realizing you were part of it. You were the one who drove her out there that night. And when you finally face the man who destroyed her, he just smirks and says, "You can't kill what the town already decided it wanted." That's when you understand. Claire didn't just die. She was chosen. Before we dive deeper to see the truth about Elkwood, Wyoming, which shattered an entire community, and how one man uncovered the lie that turned love into murder, hit subscribe and like for more cold cases and chilling mysteries. They found the photograph first, a glossy 4x6 that had been tucked, for all these years, into the lining of an old cedar trunk in the attic of the Miller farmhouse. The picture was ordinary at a glance. A woman leaning against a white pickup at the county fair, hair sun-bleached and windswept, her smile small and private. It belonged to Claire Benson. Everyone in Sweetwater County would tell you, if they were being honest. Claire, who worked nights at the diner and went to church on Sundays. Claire, who took the long way home even when the gas light blinked. Her disappearance in the summer of 2003 had been a wound you learned to step around. The town grew older and then older again. The diner changed owners twice. Sheriff's deputies retired into the same weathered chairs at O'Malley's. Still, the unsaid name hung at the back of conversation like a draft. For 2 decades, the story folded itself into the town's calendar of small hurt things. The fundraiser for the Benson family, the squinted newspaper articles with possible sighting in faded ink, the armfuls of candles at vigils that smelled like melted wax and regret. When the photograph surfaced, it should have been just another relic, another notch on a case file that had, for 21 years, gone cold. Instead, it became a hinge. It was Sheriff Adam Harlan who recognized the vanishing. It was Sheriff Harlan who ran the trunk's jeweled edge under the light and felt, with a quiet, weeping kind of terror, the suffocating detail of a life removed from its frame. At first, he thought he had only found something sentimental. Claire's photograph among old rodeo ribbons and a creased map of Jackson. But the back bore handwriting he didn't expect. An address, a name not in any of the lists, and a tucked, brittle note that read simply, "You owe me." The Miller farmhouse had belonged to Ella Miller, a woman whose family had quietly held one of Wyoming's cornerstones, a gravel pit that had put money on tables, and, as Adam knew now, kept mouths closed. Ella's grandson, Marcus, had been an awkward kid when Claire vanished. A man with a steady jaw and a shovel callus on his hand now. He had inherited more than dirt. Marcus said he had never seen the picture in his life. He said that if Claire's family wanted it back, they'd have it. Across from a farmhouse, a town could find 1,000 reasons to say no. But duty, like grief, doesn't care for comfort. Harlan took the photograph, the note, and a renewed ledger of the case back to his office. He told himself he was motivated by nothing more noble than procedural obligation. It was easier to believe that than to say he felt the old ache in his chest open up like a seam. Claire Benson had been 27 when she disappeared. She was warm-handed and stubborn, one of those people who kept words tucked like coins for emergencies. In 2003, she worked at a diner that smelled like coffee and butter, and she saw her future as a slow accumulation of weekdays, a house with a porch light left on, a dog that let her be boss, the kind of Midwestern patience that grows like lichen on rocks. She loved her younger brother Evan with a loyalty that sometimes made neighbors smirk, the sort of kinship that taught a man how to fold laundry the way his sister liked it and to listen when the radio played slow songs. The investigation had been messy, the kind of small-town police work that tripped over personal histories. There was a boyfriend then, a mechanic who had left town shortly after Claire's disappearance. There were a few men who liked her laugh, men whose names ended up on lists and in margins, men who drank at the same bar and worked the same shifts. There was also a man called Joseph Crane, a contractor and pleasant at parties, whose business cards you could buy at the feed store. He had owned the white pickup in the photograph. Joseph Crane moved often enough that the police file on him was a dull accordion of addresses. He denied everything when they talked to him in 2003. He was polite enough to make denials pleasant. Without physical evidence, the case stalled on questions that slid under fingernails. Claire's family, hollowed and angry, moved in circles of hope and hopelessness. The town turned its attention to bull sales and high school ceremonies. Grief sometimes dries like mud. Then, in the summer of 2024, a long blink after the photograph surfaced, a state trooper made a routine traffic stop just north of Casper. What he pulled over was an aging motorhome that looked like it had been stitched back together many times. Inside, beneath a mattress and behind a false panel, were items cataloged in that old file. A locket with Claire's initials, 2 receipts from the very diner where she'd worked, and a small, dark piece of fabric that the lab could later match to fibers found beneath a nail fragment from the scene, where investigators believed Claire had been forced into a vehicle. The arrest that followed in September 2024, Joseph Crane, now 53, brought in from a trailer park in Idaho, is where the town's face changed. The story in the papers said arrest shocks community. It is accurate to say the whole community felt as if someone had moved a load-bearing wall and found an empty space behind it. But arrests, even those that land with thunder in headlines, are only punctuation. The real shock had to do with who, even now, held the strings. As the case reopened, evidence breathed a new life. DNA tests, run on samples long preserved in frozen vials, found matches that were impossible to ignore. For the first time in 2 decades, Harlan had maps of where the story could lead. He had to go back through old statements, talk to old deputies, and knock on doors that had been shut out of fatigue. Sweetwater County is frugal with secrets, but careless with them other ways. People meant well. They meant to forget. They had reasons. Claire's brother Evan had tried to keep his grief private, and he worked hard at a landscaping business that left his hands sawed and capable. He had given statements in 2003 that were sharp and honest. He had also come to the conclusion that if they didn't find a body, you must keep living. Find my sister, he told Harlan once, then tell me how to live with the answer. When the detective team dug into the Miller farmhouse more thoroughly, they found journals, not just grocery lists and receipts, but a sequence of entries that read like someone talking to themselves in whole sentences, the way one talks into a dark room. The entries revealed a relationship that wasn't in the original case files. Ella Miller and Joseph Crane had been close. Not lovers, not in any fashion that the town could gossip about. Rather, they had been partners in a quieter kind of arrangement. Marcus's family business had been given contracts at odd rates, and whoever you asked about it smiled in an embarrassed way. There was a paragraph, small and almost casual in a notebook's margin, that changed the texture of the town's assumptions. He said she should be taught to stay in her place. I said no. The handwriting was smudged. When Harlan read that sentence aloud, the room where he and his team sat felt colder. You could, as a town, believe in the sanctity of the neighborly veil, that people kept to themselves, and that business stayed between men who bought feed together. Or you could believe that some men traded in influence like another currency. The truth always felt messy in Sweetwater, and now it began to crack luminous edges. As investigators pulled at threads, Claire's life reassembled in small, gutting details. She'd been cautious, sometimes too cautious, but she'd also stood between others and awkwardness, choosing kindness even when she felt cornered. She had been working extra shifts to save for a mechanical apprenticeship. She wanted to fix cars, to steady herself against a life that sometimes felt flimsy. She had jokes she kept for serious days, and she wrote postcards to herself sometimes, sentences tucked into envelopes with stamps, notes that said things like "keep going" in blocky ink. Those who remembered Claire best spoke of a laugh that arrived slowly and a habit of tilting her head before she spoke, as if weighing the words like spoons. Each of those small habits felt like a betrayal when you thought how they had left so little trace. Joseph Crane's trial, the news cameras, the mileage of testimony, began to bracket the old pain with a new kind. For some families, a trial is a way to focus grief. For others, it's a fresh trauma, an old wound rubbed with salt. The prosecution painted a picture that felt like a slow-burning match. Crane was meticulous, practiced at convincing people of his harmlessness. He had a way of speaking that suggested he was always offering help, which is often the best armor for those who use help as a leash. But nothing in the criminal proceeding contained the full story. What emerged increasingly was not just about Crane, but about how a town's economy and its quiet favors could become scaffolding for darker impulses. Favored contractors got the best bids. Favored sons found work. Favored silence protected more than polite reputations. It protected physical spaces where secrets could be tucked away like spare parts. The defense attempted to make Claire responsible in the polite way defense attorneys do. She had made choices, she had been seen with different men, she had lived freely. The county, listening, shifted uncomfortably. There are always those who will search for the blemish on the victim's record, as if it could explain violence. Harlan watched the family's faces as the defense argued. There was a geological patience in them now, like those who have learned to live with the constant threat of bad weather. During a recess, Evan Benson took a long walk behind the courthouse. He had grown into a man whose face carried his sister's spare, serious expression. He still kept the last letter she wrote, a postcard of a motel in Idaho, its edges softened, in his wallet. He said, "I don't want vengeance. I want to know." There was no comic book need in his phrasing, no thirst for blood. He wanted to map back to the day his sister's life ended, so he might fold it into a shape he could carry without being crushed. The prosecution's chief witness was a woman named Rose Finch, who had been Ella Miller's neighbor in 2003. Rose had kept a secret for 21 years because secrets are contracts drafted in fear. In 2003, she was 21, and she had worked evenings at the feed store, laughing with Claire while she stacked bales. Then she had seen something she couldn't unsee. She testified that on the night Claire disappeared, she had driven past a gravel pit where a group of men lingered with the ferocity of ritual. She had seen a white pickup and a single woman stepping around the equipment. She had been afraid then, and shame closed her mouth because the men included a person she now recognized, Marcus Miller. Rose had been young and had hoped time would rearrange her fear into forgetfulness. The law does not honor hope as easily as it honors evidence, but on the stand she had decided to trade silence for a trembling kind of courage. When the court replayed the phone records, a pattern emerged. Calls between Crane and a number registered in Ella Miller's name on the nights before Claire vanished. A ride home recorded by a gas station camera that showed Claire stepping into a vehicle that looked like Crane's pickup. A motel registry with a name scratched and stamped and later crossed out. Each scrap hooked into another, and the net began to close. By the time the jury deliberated, the town had split along invisible seams. Some sat in coffee shops and argued in low voices about whether the county could be accused of complicity. Others kept to their porches, staring west. Newspapers printed the old photograph. Social media drummed it into every browser. People who had once tooted about gossip found their tongues tied in different knots. Even the preacher at First Baptist paused in his sermons, his eyes softer, as if negotiating an internal calculus about mercy and consequence. On the 14th day of deliberation, the jury returned. The forewoman's lips were thin as a line of wind. Joseph Crane was convicted on charges of kidnapping and murder. The courthouse exhaled. Some wept, some went quiet. For Evan and the family, conviction was a kind of breathing after long submersion. Not relief, precisely, but the ability to breathe at all. Yet the conviction did not, for everyone, explain why a photograph had been hidden in a trunk. It did not explain why a note had been written in the creases of a ledger that said, "You still owe me." It did not explain how a town balanced favors like ledger entries, or why some people had been so quick to look away. After the trial, Harlan was asked in an interview whether justice had been served. He answered carefully, as if testing a new language. "We serve the law," he said. "As for justice, that's something the town will have to continue working toward." His words were measured, but there was a fatigue in his voice, a recognition that cases are like gravel pits. When you excavate, you find more layers. As the story reached its public punctuation, the quiet devils of the town stirred. A man who had once been a county commissioner resigned suddenly. A ledger of payments surfaced in which donations and consulting fees formed an ugly arithmetic. More than one person made phone calls late at night, their voices broken between insistence and excuse. People who had once loved Crane's company now sifted memories of handshakes and barbecues and tried to reconcile them with the man on trial. What the trial could not resolve were the smaller, human things, the scraps of Claire that had been scattered like seeds. A tin box containing a handful of Claire's postcards turned up in the trunk, letters to herself about the ocean. Evan read them aloud at a community vigil, each line landing like a stone. "Keep going," Claire had written. People in Sweetwater listened to those scraps of handwriting and found themselves awkwardly following an instruction from a woman who would never arrive at the place she encouraged. The turn of events also reopened old fractures within the Miller family. Marcus, who had been polite in testimony, found himself in a shadow of suspicion. The grand jury considered charging him with accessory to murder. They convoked panels cage-like to decide whether silence had been active complicity or frightened deference. Marcus's defense was that he had helped move tools and money, and that the innards of the business had always seemed murky. He painted his own silence as ignorance rather than malevolence. In the weeks after the conviction, Ella Miller packed the cedar trunk and sent it away in a cardboard box. She wrote a letter to the Benson family, an apology that thinly veiled pride, a line about how she had been afraid her whole life and finally could not be. "We bury things because we fear them," she wrote. "I buried this, and maybe that's why she died." Outside legal consequences, the town conducted its own slow reckonings. The diner installed a new mural, Claire's smile immortalized in paint over the window, a relentless, forgiving thing. Young women started joining a community group that learned self-defense and the politics of boundaries. Conversations that had been unspoken moved into the light. Awkwardness in the grocery aisle gave way to questions about how to be kinder without being naive. Still, a stubborn unease pulsed under the surface. In a quiet moment, Harlan sat in his truck and opened the worn photograph again. The woman in it, Claire, squinted against sunlight, the lines at the corners of her eyes ready with future smiles. There was a pleading there and an absence. And for a second Harlan wondered whether the photograph knew more than any human would allow. In late October, as leaves went brittle, a call came in from the state lab. They had found something unexpected in a recently tested sample, a partial print on the inside of the cedar trunk's lid that belonged to a man who hadn't been listed in the original files. The name connected faintly to a small construction crew that had done odd jobs across 3 counties, a crew whose foreman had left town in 2004 after a domestic dispute. When asked, Marcus Miller had denied the foreman's involvement and said he'd never had reason to suspect the man, though the ledger they'd found included his initials. Harlan felt the weight of new possibility like a weather change. Every solved case folds out more questions. Every arrest is a new page for rumor. He had convictions in a courthouse now, but the evidence that lived in margins and attics told him this was not over. In the days that followed, subpoenas were drafted and subpoenas were served. People who had thought their lives had returned to normal found old calls being subpoenaed, old receipts being pored over, and an awareness that the town's ledger had more pages. At the Benson house, Evan stood on the porch at dusk and watched the sky speak in bruises. His sister's photo sat in his coat pocket. Sometimes he'd take it out and hold it to his chest. He'd always imagined closure like a clean line, but instead it came in scraps that fit poorly together like a child's puzzle. He'd thought the conviction would give him directions on how to live with the past. Instead it offered him a new set of questions about who else had been involved, who had watched and stayed silent. The story ended for the cameras and the headlines with the conviction. But the truth, that slippery human thing, didn't fit tidily into copy. It threaded into diners and basements, into ledger books, into furtive glances. The town had made a public promise to be more attentive. It had also been burned by its own attachments. On a cold November evening, about a month after the trial, A figure knocked on the door of the Benson house. Evan opened it slowly. On the porch stood a woman he knew only by reputation, Rose Finch. She had been the witness who'd finally told what she'd seen, the one who had borne her secret like a stone for 21 years. Her eyes were hollowed by time, but steady. "I kept something else," she said, without preamble. In the pause that followed, Evan felt the room expand with the possibility of new pain or new answers. The air smelled like rain, and the porch light flickered as if uncertain. Rose reached into her coat and produced a small, folded envelope. It was yellowed and thin, and inside was a key, its teeth worn like someone had turned it many times. Rose's voice, when she spoke again, was small enough that it felt like an offering. "It opens a storage unit at the West Lot," she said. "I didn't want to talk back then. I'm telling you now." Evan stared at the key, at Rose, and at the space between what he thought he knew and what may still be hidden. The key trembled in his hand. There were, waiting in the wings, places they had not yet looked. There were names that still hadn't been asked about. The conviction had been a loud, necessary thing, but now the case opened into a darker room. In the weeks that followed, subpoenas stretched into months. The storage unit opened and revealed crates of paperwork, a rusted toolbox with initials scratched into the underside, a boot that matched prints found in the gravel pit, and folded into the lining of another trunk, a letter addressed, not to Claire, but to Ella. It read, "You said this would keep us safe." It did not. Sweetwater's pronounced relief had been premature. Across town, families who had once believed themselves protected watched as more names rose, as more doors were asked to open. Harlan found himself in a new rhythm that wasn't the satisfying thud of closure, but the more grueling cadence of continued inquiry. The final chapter, if there could ever be such a thing, had been postponed. Justice, the town had learned, wasn't a single verdict, but an ongoing reckoning. The jury had spoken, and yet the truth kept an unfinished quality, making itself known in crates and keys and thin handwriting. On a night when snow threatened and the horizon sat like a darker bruise, Evan stood again on his porch and gripped the photograph of his sister, as if it were a talisman. He thought of the key and of the heavy box that had been opened, and he wondered whether the next reveal would be healing or worse. He couldn't say. He only knew that he had to keep going, because Claire had written "keep going" on a postcard to herself, and because the photograph in his pocket showed a woman who had once thought the future was a long, kind road she could walk down with a dog at her heels. As the valley held its breath, the story of Claire Benson, a woman loved, lost, and then partly found again, became not an ending, but a hinge. People in Sweetwater learned how brittle silence could be, and how dangerous. They also learned, slowly and painfully, that truth often arrived wrapped in inconvenience and in courage. Somewhere beyond the county line, a car pulled onto the gravel road that led to the storage units. A figure stepped out and looked toward the yellow lights of the lot, fingers clenched around a small envelope. The camera would later catch this person's shadow slipping into the night, and the footage would show a silhouette that did not match anyone yet convicted or questioned. The file grows. The ledger still has blank paper. Evan turned the key in his palm as if it might open not only a rusted lock, but something inside him. I don't know who else to call, he thought, and the thought felt both selfish and true. The lot at the west edge would be cold. The storage unit's door would squeal like a mouth about to tell a secret. He could go alone, but the night is a cunning thing, and sometimes courage tastes like company. Instead, he folded the photograph against his heart, slid the key into a pocket, and walked toward the truck. Behind him, the Benson house breathed in the rain. Somewhere in the town lights blinked, but not all lights are warnings. Some are invitations. He had the key. Some doors only open once. He stopped, listening for something he could not name. Still, the key weighed more than metal. Evan could feel it through his jeans pocket as he drove through the night toward the west lot, the steering wheel slick against his palms. Rain had started, the kind of thin drizzle that made the world look half erased. The storage unit sat just past the rail yard, a row of corrugated mouths yawning in the dark. He'd been there once as a kid, helping his father move tools, but now the place looked hollow, like a rib cage stripped meat. He parked, engine idling. the headlights cutting a tunnel through the mist. The lock on Unit 47 shone faintly, its number etched into the metal. The key fit perfectly. When he turned it, something in him resisted. A pulse of fear that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with memory. The latch released with a dry click. The door rolled up groaning, and the smell hit him, dust, oil, and something faintly sweet, like flowers long dead. Inside, the beam of his flashlight skimmed across boxes, a stack of newspapers, and the glint of glass. The rain outside softened into white noise. He stepped in. At first, he thought it was just more of the same, files, ledgers, tools. But the further he looked, the clearer it became that someone had built this place like a museum of Claire's last days. On one wall, photographs. Hundreds of them. Most were ordinary, women at diners, parking lots, church fairs. But when he got closer, he saw the pattern. They were all women who looked like Claire. Blonde or sandy-haired, between 20 and 30, their faces frozen mid-smile. Each photo was pinned with a number, written in the same slanted handwriting he'd seen on the note inside the cedar trunk. And at the center, Claire's photo. The one from the county fair, enlarged to nearly 2 feet wide. Under it, a newspaper clipping laminated in plastic. Local woman still missing. Police continue search. The flashlight trembled in his hand. On a small table sat a tape recorder, one of those old handheld models from the early 2000s. Next to it, a box of tapes labeled with dates. He picked one at random, August 14, 2003, and slid it into the player. The machine hissed, then crackled. A man's voice. Calm. Too calm. She says she's scared. Keeps asking for her brother. Keeps saying someone told her not to trust me. Evan froze. The voice wasn't Joseph Crane's. He'd watched enough of the trial footage to know that voice. This one was different, steadier, lower, and disturbingly familiar. It was his father's. Evan stopped breathing. He hit pause, then play again, hoping he'd misheard. She said Ella warned her. Said she knew about the pit. About the payments. She shouldn't have known. Someone told her. A sigh. I'll handle it. I just need her to stop talking. The sound of a door closing. The tape ended in static. Evan's knees gave out. He sat hard on the concrete floor, the recorder still hissing. His father, Harold Benson, had been part of the investigation in 2003. A sheriff's deputy back then. Everyone had said he was one of the good ones, the kind who never looked the other way. He died 5 years later, a heart attack that no one questioned because guilt doesn't show up on autopsy reports. Evan pressed his hand to his mouth, choking on something too big for sound. He found 3 more tapes, all with his father's voice. In them, the tone shifted from control to panic. August 15th, she saw the truck. She saw Marcus. It wasn't supposed to be her. August 17th, they said keep it quiet. Ella said the county depends on this. I told them she's just a kid. They didn't care. August 20th, a silence that lasted almost a minute before a whisper. Evan can't know. No one can. He dropped the recorder. It clattered against the floor, spinning before settling into silence. The rain outside thickened, hammering against the metal roof. The unit felt smaller, like the air itself was closing around him. Every breath hurt. He stood, shaking, and stared again at the wall of photos. How many of those women had been handled? How many had seen too much, asked too many questions? He thought of his sister, her careful kindness, her soft stubbornness, and how easy it must have been for her to trust her own father's friends. There was another box beneath the table. He opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were letters, all addressed to Ella Miller, written in the same tidy script as the tape's labels. The first line of one stopped him cold. You promised me she'd be safe. The date, 2 days before Claire vanished. The rest of the letter was a blur of threats and pleading. Whoever wrote it, Harold Benson, his father, had been desperate to keep something contained. If the county goes down, one line read, we all go with it. He folded the paper back into the box. He couldn't cry. Not yet. The grief was too deep, the betrayal too sharp. When he stepped outside, the rain felt heavier. He locked the unit again, though he didn't know why. maybe to stop the ghosts from escaping. The drive home was a blur, headlights slicing through fog, the windshield wipers beating time against his thoughts. He parked at the house, left the engine running, and sat staring at the dark outline of the porch. For the first time, he wondered if Claire had known, if she'd discovered something about their father, something she couldn't live with. The thought curdled in his stomach. Inside, he poured whiskey into a glass he didn't need and drank until the burn blurred his vision. The tape recorder sat on the table, silent, but he could still hear his father's voice. "I'll handle it." He didn't sleep that night. By morning, word had already leaked. Someone, maybe Rose, maybe one of the deputies, had mentioned the storage unit. Sheriff Harlan called at sunrise. His tone was soft but measured. "Evan," he said, "we need to talk about what you found." Evan didn't answer. He couldn't. When the deputies came, they treated him gently, as if he might break. They sealed the unit, took the tapes, bagged the letters. Harlan met Evan's eyes with a weariness that looked too old for his face. "I didn't know about your dad," he said quietly. "None of us did." Evan almost laughed, a short, broken sound. "No one ever does." The town spiraled again. The headlines changed overnight. Convicted killer may not have acted alone. Corruption allegations surface. Joseph Crane's lawyer filed an appeal. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. Sweetwater's name, once whispered, was now shouted across every news feed. And beneath all that noise, Evan unraveled. He stopped answering calls. Stopped eating. Some nights, he drove back to the lot and sat outside the unit, staring at the lock, half hoping someone else would come for it, someone who still believed there was an end to this story. But the story didn't end. It shifted. A week later, Rose Finch disappeared. Her car was found near the Ridge Road, driver's side door open, keys still in the ignition. The seat was wet from rain. No signs of struggle, just absence, the cruel kind that leaves everything tidy. Harlan went quiet after that. He stopped giving interviews, stopped updating the press. Evan knew why, because this wasn't just history repeating. It was continuing. One night, Evan's phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered without thinking. A voice, low-comm male, said, "You shouldn't have gone to the unit." Then the line clicked dead. He froze. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. For a long time, he didn't move. Then he checked the windows, the locks, the shadows. Every sound felt personal. He went back to the recorder, desperate for more clues. There was one tape he hadn't played. The last one, dated August 21st, 2003. The day Claire disappeared. He pressed play. At first, only static. Then his father's voice again, shaking. "They said they'd handle it. I couldn't stop them. She's in the pit." A pause. Then another voice, faint in the background. Female. Not Claire. Older. "You did what you had to, Harold. She shouldn't have gone digging." It was Ella Miller. Her tone wasn't cruel. It was worse. Pitying. Almost maternal. Evan sat frozen, the tape spinning on. Then came a new sound, a knock, faint but distinct. Then a voice he hadn't expected to hear. "Dad." "Claire." His heart stopped. "Dad, please, they said you come. Please, I'm..." The rest was drowned in static. He ejected the tape, staring at it like it might bleed. His father hadn't killed her, not directly. But he'd been there. He'd watched. Maybe helped bury her. And Ella, the town matriarch everyone pitted, everyone excused, had been there too. Sweetwater's whole foundation was rot. Evan didn't tell Harlan about the final tape. He didn't trust anyone anymore. He just kept hearing his sister's voice echoing through static. "Dad, please," until it hollowed out his sleep. By the second week, he was barely functioning. But the need to know kept gnawing. He drove to the old gravel pit. The county had fenced it off years ago, claiming it was unstable. But the padlock was nothing a crowbar couldn't fix. The ground was hard, cracked with ice, and the air smelled like metal and rain. He walked until he reached the center, a hollowed basin surrounded by cliffs. It was quiet except for wind. He tried to imagine what had happened there 21 years ago. A truck's headlights cutting across the dirt. His sister's voice echoing. The sound of shovels. He closed his eyes. And then he heard it. A whisper. At first he thought it was the wind through the rocks. But then he heard it again. His name, soft, drawn out. Evan. He turned. Nothing but shadow. His pulse kicked. Logic told him it was just the wind, the echo off the walls. But something in the voice, the way it trembled between sound and thought, was unmistakable. Evan, please. He fell to his knees. The whisper was close now, right beneath him, like it was seeping up from the earth. He dug at the dirt with his hands until his nails bled. The ground was soft in one spot different. He clawed at it until his fingers hit something solid. A corner of metal. A box. Rusted, small. He pried it open. Inside, a cassette, wrapped in plastic, marked with a single word. Truth. He stared at it, heart pounding. The drive home was a blur again. He didn't remember the turns, only the sound of the rain and the hum of his thoughts. Back at the house, he slid the tape into the recorder. It clicked, hissed, then played. A man's voice, not his father's, not Crane's. Marcus Miller's. She said she'd tell. I told Joe to scare her, not kill her. Then your dad came. Said we couldn't risk it. Ella made the call. She said she'd make it right. We buried her, but not where they looked. She's still watching us, Harold. She's still here. Static. Then a sound that didn't belong to tape, a breath, soft and wet, too close to the microphone. Then silence. Evan stared at the recorder, frozen. The tape was old, 21 years. But the breath, it sounded alive. Present. He hit rewind, then play again. The same. Breath. Silence. He looked around the room. The shadows were thicker now, the corners deeper. For the first time since childhood, he felt watched. The next morning, Sheriff Harlan came to see him. He looked pale, older. He sat at the kitchen table, hat in hand. We searched the pit again last night, he said. We found something. Evan's throat tightened. Her. Harlan nodded slowly. Remains. Partial. We're running confirmation. But there's more. He slid a photo across the table. A close-up of a small pendant, the one Claire always wore. Inside it, under the glass, was a photo of the two of them as kids. And behind that photo, something else, a folded piece of paper. Evan unfolded it with shaking fingers. It wasn't a note to him. It was a list of names. Ella Miller, Joseph Crane, Marcus Miller, Harold Benson, and one more, scrawled at the bottom in different ink. Evan Benson. The room spun. She wrote that before she died, Harlan said softly. We don't know why your name's there. Evan couldn't speak. He just stared at the page until the letters blurred. He didn't remember the sheriff leaving. Didn't remember the rest of that day. Only that by nightfall, he'd driven back to the pit again, as if the ground itself might explain. The wind cut colder now, sharper. He stood at the edge and looked down. If Claire had written his name, what had she meant? Had she known he'd find all this? Or had she known something about herself? Something that made her afraid of him, too? He remembered flashes, small, buried things. The night she disappeared, he'd been home, drunk, angry at his father for something he couldn't even recall. But had he really stayed home? Or was that just what he'd told himself? Because memory is kind to the guilty? He closed his eyes. For a second, he saw her, standing in the headlights, rain in her hair, that half smile she always wore when she thought she could fix everything. Then the image shifted. Her face changed. Her smile widened, too wide. You came back, she whispered. He stumbled backward. The wind roared. And then he saw it, a shape at the bottom of the pit, pale against the dark, just for an instant before the rain blurred it away. He ran. By the time he reached his truck, his hands were shaking too hard to hold the keys. He sat there, soaked, breathing in short, broken gasps. He looked down at the recorder in the passenger seat. It had turned itself on. Static filled the cab. Then her voice again, clear this time, soft and calm. Keep going. The same words she'd written on her postcards. He stared into the darkness, heart hammering, unsure if the sound was real or just the echo of everything he'd dug up. But somewhere deep inside, he knew the truth wasn't buried anymore. It was moving, breathing, waiting. And in Sweetwater County, Some ghosts didn't stay underground. Evan sat in his truck, hands trembling on the steering wheel, the metal key in his pocket burning through the fabric of his jeans like a live coal. The wind screamed through the narrow streets of Elkwood, dragging dust and brittle leaves across the cracked pavement. His reflection in the windshield looked older, haunted, like the town itself was staring back at him through his own eyes. He didn't go home. Instead, he drove past the old diner, past the place where Claire had once stood laughing in the rain on Main Street, back before the world had turned cruel. He drove until the road narrowed into the dirt track that led toward the quarry, the same place they had found her car all those years ago. The headlights bounced off the rocks, cutting through the fog that had rolled in over the water's edge. When he finally stopped the engine, the silence was deafening. Only the distant creak of metal from the old mine shaft broke through the night. He stepped out. The air was bitter cold, and every sound, the crunch of gravel under his boots, the rustle of wind through the brush, felt magnified. He made his way toward the small, rusted door embedded into the side of the hill. The key in his hand gleamed under the moonlight, and as he slid it into the lock, it turned smoother than it should have after 2 decades. The door groaned open, revealing a narrow tunnel. The air smelled of damp concrete and something else, something faintly metallic. He clicked on his flashlight. Inside, the walls were lined with old photographs, their edges curled for moisture. All of them were of Claire. Her smile, her eyes, her hands mid-gesture. Dozens of moments from her life frozen in time. Some were candid. Others had clearly been taken without her knowing. Evan's pulse quickened. He stepped closer, tracing one image with his gloved finger. It was Claire standing outside the Elkwood Library. He'd taken that one himself in college. But these prints, they were developed differently, like they came from a darkroom. Someone had been watching her long before she disappeared. Then, at the end of the narrow hall, he saw something that made his throat close up. A single chair, bolted to the floor, and next to it, a tape recorder. He pressed play. There was static first, then a woman's voice, faint and trembling. "Evan, if you're hearing this, it means they found me." He froze. It was Claire's voice. "They said it was just a test," she continued, her breath uneven. "A little project for the town. But I saw what they were really doing. I saw the photos, the files, the cameras they put in people's homes. Sheriff Leland said it was to keep us safe. But that's a lie. They were building something, a story. They wanted someone to disappear. Someone clean. Someone people would mourn." The tape clicked. "I was supposed to be their symbol," Claire whispered. "A face to hide the rot underneath." Evan's flashlight began to flicker, and the shadows in the tunnel seemed to stretch closer, pressing in around him. He replayed that last line over and over until his hand began to shake so hard he nearly dropped the device. He stumbled backward, scanning the walls again, now realizing what the photographs were. They weren't just pictures of Claire. They were surveillance stills, dated, catalogued, some with red markings, names written in pen beneath them. Leland, McCarthy, Evan. He stepped closer to one labeled August 2nd, 03. The night before Claire vanished. In the photo, Claire sat inside the diner, talking to someone across the booth. Evan leaned in, and when he saw the face of the person opposite her, his knees nearly gave out. It was himself. He didn't remember that night. Not like that. He remembered laughter, coffee, plans for the weekend. But the photo showed something different, tension, fear. Her hands gripping her cup so tightly her knuckles went white. He turned to the next picture. Claire outside his house. Then another, Claire in her car, headlights cutting through the fog. The same night she disappeared. Each image followed her final movements until the last one. A blurry, zoomed-in shot of her face looking terrified, glancing toward the driver's seat. Someone else was there. Evan could barely breathe. Suddenly, his flashlight died. The tunnel was swallowed in darkness. He fumbled in his pocket for his phone, but before he could turn on the light, a faint click echoed behind him. The sound of a boot scuffing against the concrete. "Don't bother," a voice said. Calm, cold, familiar. Evan turned slowly, his pulse hammering in his ears. Sheriff Leland stood in the doorway, older now, but with the same quiet, heavy presence. His hand rested casually on his belt, near the holster. "I told you to leave it alone," Leland said softly. Evan tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. She knew. "Claire knew what you were doing." Leland smiled faintly. "She was too smart for her own good. Always thought she could fix things, thought she could save this town." He took a step forward. "But you can't save something that never wanted saving." Evan backed away until his shoulders hit the cold wall. "You killed her." The sheriff's face barely changed. "Killed her? No, son. I just gave this town what it needed." "What are you talking about?" Leland's eyes glimmered in the dark. "Every town has a story, a tragedy that keeps people bound together. Without that, people start asking questions. They start looking too close. Claire's death gave Elkwood a purpose. It gave people something to hold on to." Evan's stomach twisted. You used her?" "Not just her," Leland said, his tone lowering. "Everyone, including you." Evan blinked. "What?" The sheriff tilted his head. "Who do you think drove her out here that night? Who told her we needed to talk?" "You did, Evan. I made sure of it. You were our perfect witness. Young, heartbroken, believable." "That's a lie," Evan said, shaking his head. "I would never." But then flashes of that night came flooding back. The fog, the car headlights, Claire's trembling hands, the way she looked at him when she said, "Evan, something's wrong with this town." He had driven her out there. He'd told her Leland wanted to meet. He'd believed he was helping. "I didn't know," Evan whispered. "I didn't know." Leland stepped closer until the barrel of his gun pressed lightly against Evan's chest. "That's the beauty of it, son. You didn't need to know. You just needed to care enough to keep her alive in everyone's memory." The air seemed to stop moving. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley. Evan stared into the sheriff's eyes, and for the first time, he saw what Claire must have seen, the quiet madness behind that steady, fatherly face. "She recorded everything," Evan said, trying to sound steadier than he felt. "It's all here. Her voice. The proof." Leland smiled again, slow and weary. "You think I didn't know that? Why do you think I left the key where you could find it? People forget, son. That's what they do best. They move on. You can't change what this place already decided it wanted." He lowered the gun, not out of mercy, but indifference, and turned to leave. "Go home, Evan. Let her stay dead." But something inside Evan snapped. He lunged. The struggle was brief, desperate. A flash of metal, a burst of light, a deafening echo that tore through the tunnel. When it was over, the sheriff lay on the ground, eyes open, staring at nothing. Evan fell beside him, gasping. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. The tape recorder still sat on the chair, the red light blinking. He pressed play again, shaking, and Claire's voice came through one last time. "If they ever find me, Evan, promise me something. Don't let them tell my story for me." The words echoed through the tunnel until they became part of the wind itself. He looked down at the sheriff's lifeless body, and then at his own reflection in a shard of broken. For the first time, he saw it clearly. The exhaustion, the guilt, the shadow of a man who'd become part of the story he was trying to destroy. By dawn, the authorities arrived. They found Leland dead, Evan unconscious. The news spread through Elkwood like wildfire. The sheriff, the town's protector, revealed as the orchestrator of the most haunting mystery in its history. But the real shock came weeks later, when the investigation revealed another truth, one that froze the entire community. The fingerprints on the tape recorder weren't just Leland's. They were also Evan's. And the original recording, the one Claire had made, was missing. The copy found in the tunnel was a re-recording, dated months after her disappearance. Someone had altered it. Someone had rewritten the story, just as Leland said they would. In the end, no one knew what really happened that night by the quarry. Some said Evan was framed. Others whispered that grief had driven him mad. But in the quiet corners of Elkwood, there were those who claimed to have seen him, or something like him, standing by the water's edge at night, holding a tape recorder, listening to Claire's voice replay over and over again, as if waiting for her to finish her last sentence. And every time the wind howled through the valley, the townsfolk swore they could still hear it, That final plea, carried through the dark. Don't let them tell my story for me. Then silence. And Elkwood, Wyoming, finally learned what it meant to keep a secret. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on the notification bell, so you stay updated with mystery stories that strike a chord. Thanks for watching.